Hello, and welcome back to part 2 of the Ghosts N Goblins Trilogy review. Last time we tackled Ghosts N Goblins for NES, a game many consider one of the hardest of all time and also one of the most infuriating. We made it through 6 levels of torment, and today we are going to take a full look at its sequel, Ghouls N Ghosts, which only has 5 levels by the way, not including its final boss. Today we will be finding out if this game is in fact an improvement on the series and what makes Ghouls N Ghosts one of the hardest games on the Sega Genesis. Upon starting the game up, you'll notice it has a nice title screen that is glowing with an eerie, ghostly blue, along with a devilish smirk, assuring you right away that this game is not messing around and is certainly evil. In the options, you have a practice and professional mode. Practice is supposed to be the game's version of an easy mode, but there isn't really much of a difference between the practice and professional modes. Honestly, the biggest difference is that if you select practice mode, you have the word practice pasted at the bottom of the screen. It makes any progress or success feel like it doesn't count. Once you start the game, you are shown the levels ahead in classic G&G style. And as you might expect, level 1 starts in the graveyard. Right away, you'll notice a huge graphical improvement from Ghosts N Goblins. Little Green Reaper enemies quickly rise from the earth and look great. The background makes it clear that it's a stormy night with dark clouds and lightning. There are skulls all around, people that were left to die in torture devices, and an exceptionally disturbing hanging corpse from a noose. The classic graveyard theme is back, but now richer and has more depth, plus the Genesis sound chip makes it sound extra spooky and nice. Plus the collision sound effect of your weapons hitting your enemies is crunchy and satisfying. Speaking of weapons, there are 2 new ones added alongside the previously known javelin, fire, axe, and dagger, better known as the knife. There's a sword that Arthur swings instead of throwing, and a discus that flies straight or can be thrown to skim the ground if you're ducking. The biggest change to your weapons are their special abilities once you obtain the golden armor. The golden armor is revealed by finding and opening consecutive chests without getting hit. Once you have it, you can hold the attack button to charge your magic meter and then release it to use your new ability. Some of these are pretty helpful, but they also make Arthur stop in his tracks and can leave you in vulnerable situations. Unfortunately, the gold armor flies off after only taking 1 hit as well, which is pretty disappointing and makes the character feel too much like a glass cannon in my opinion. Even still, it's a nice addition to the game, giving it more depth and makes the player want to open chests with different weapons to see all the powers, which we will talk more about later. Overall, the first level looks and sounds good, making the start to the difficult journey disturbing and also something that isn't ugly. There are all new enemies and hazards right away, like the Reapers, plus vultures and guillotines. Arthur can now throw his weapon up or down, which is super helpful. And the level gives you plenty of chances to appreciate this new ability. The halfway mark is just beyond this giant guillotine and the bridge collapses behind you, indicating that this is the new checkpoint. The rain and wind pick up while little tornadoes head your way that you must avoid. You definitely want to keep moving forward to avoid multiple tornadoes and little creatures coming all at once. The second half of the level has new enemies, plants that rise up and shoot 3 skulls out, while moving back and forth. These roots are some of my least favorite enemies in any game. They have weird hurt boxes that seem hard to find or predict. Taking the roots out quickly is important too, because they grow and can reach or trap you, but sometimes your weapon just makes this ineffective dink sound and doesn't do anything. When you combine these unpredictable roots with these moving explosive flowers, you have yourself a very challenging and frustrating second half of the first level. You have to make your way up the hills and ladders through a lot of these enemies, and their somewhat unpredictable nature can make this a big pain in the ass. In addition to the flowers and roots, they also have these pig-like trolls that behave similarly to the ogre creatures in Ghosts N Goblins, by vomiting if you're below them and charging you quickly if you get too close. Once you make it to the top of the hill, you drop to your right and you're met with the first boss. Bosses are referred to as gatekeepers, which is pretty cool. This gatekeeper is described as a giant statue, which surprised me because it looks a lot more interesting than that. It looks like a giant devil with a suit of armor, but also has animalistic features, such as a lion's mane and goat horns on its decapitated head, along with reptilian green skin and a tail. The decapitated head shoots fire out of its mouth at various heights and angles, while you need to throw your weapon to answer back. A huge change with this game's checkpoints is that you actually trigger one when you get to a boss. This makes dying on boss fights much more forgiving than Ghosts N Goblins. The weak point is the monster's head, and after enough hits, the enemy will break down in flames and reward you with a key to the next level. The second level is a bit different than others in the series. You have what appear to be bouncing boulders coming towards you down the hill. Before long, you encounter turtles and realize that these boulders are actually turtle shells. After making it through these enemies, there's a pretty annoying segment where you can fall right through bridges at certain points into the jaws of whatever creature this is. It's pretty frustrating to keep falling through and being sent back to the bottom of the hill. After this section, you encounter your first 16-bit Red Devil fight. As you can expect, they have good AI and can be pretty dangerous, but he's the only thing standing between you and the halfway checkpoint, so simply running for it isn't a bad idea. The second half is full of fire and sinking floors, along with fire bats and some plant enemies from Ghosts N Goblins. The fire has a neat glowing effect that makes you feel like you can see the heat above and below you. The answer to why everything is on fire is something you soon find out at the end of the level. After making it through the rapidly spawning fire bats and some jumps, you encounter the second gatekeeper, Infernomo, who reminds me of the fire dog from Earthbound. Obviously, Infernomo came first. The boss fight isn't very long or difficult. Just stay back and pound Infermofo's face with your weapon and duck a couple times. You'll be able to grab the key for the third level. The third level is also a bit different than other levels in the series. It's a vertically scrolling section that briefly feels like kind of a vertical shooter. It's a decent change of pace and doesn't go on for too long. These soldier enemies are pretty creepy looking. They honestly remind me of the soldiers from Resident Evil 4, but they're not very hard to kill. Other enemies make the stage feel like classic vertical shooters, such as Galaga. At some point you need to run to the right, fast enough to avoid being crushed by the ceiling and also the enemies. Here I am using the knife's special cloning power, which makes the section pretty easy. The second half of the level, though, is pretty annoying and takes some getting used to. First of all, you need to ride and jump between these devil statues' tongues and platforms, which are all constantly moving. Second of all, there are insects and even chests that pop out of nowhere and get in your way. Thirdly, it's difficult to tell that some of the obstacles aren't just part of the background, such as this floating island that crushes you without any warning. It's really a tough test of platforming precision that is made much more difficult with the stiff control. As you can see, there's a lot that gets in your way, and you really need to be dialed into your jumps in order to get to this level's boss. This floating eye must have been a huge inspiration to the Kirby series, because you see a very similar boss in multiple Kirby games. Anyway, this boss can be pretty annoying because sometimes it'll just float right at you without warning, and it's not like you can just jump over it. As the cloud circles, throwing your weapon up and down at the eye helps you get some extra hits before it has little rush or invincibility periods. You'll have some frustrating hits and deaths, but overall, if you just keep your distance and respect the eye while attacking, the fight will eventually be over. Level 4 gets pretty annoying. It starts off simple enough with the little reapers coming back, popping out of the ground and out from behind stuff. As you move forward, you'll also have a couple enemies that shoot orbs out like this big face and this strange creature. The ceiling is also sharp enough to hurt you, adding to the challenge. It can be a lot to handle at once with multiple enemies on the screen, but if you just keep running to the right the best you can while dispatching enemies, you'll eventually get to the second half of the level, which is a lot more annoying than the first. This level gets harder the further you go through, and that includes the boss. Going downhill with some ice physics and Ghouls and Ghosts doesn't really work that well. You could just have the wrong weapon for it and it becomes super frustrating and not very fun. If you move too slowly, there are these damn blue snakes that just start creeping out of the ice while these big green hands shoot orbs out. The torch actually works really well and might be the best item for the section. The discus also works well since it sticks to the ground when you're ducking, but if you have the axe for example, it throws at an upward angle and it's just really bad design. See, on Professional it seems that all of the first chests have jesters in them, so it can be really hard to find a helpful weapon for a change. The only saving grace here is the poor physical hit detection that some of these hand enemies have, so sometimes you can get really close to finish them off. I've just gotten a ton of footage showing how stupid this part can be, and it's just something you want to get through as quickly as possible before you go insane. There are several times where I get hit, and while I'm invincible, I fall down a few floors, and I'm just so desperate to finish the section that I get excited that I skip stuff and try to finish the level this way, begging that I don't need to go to the top again. The music in this level starts to wear on you too. Overall, the enemies are super annoying, there are spikes. The ice effect when you already have such limited control is just too much, plus your jumping can be very clippy between floors, and it's all, again, just a big pain in the ass. To finish the deal, you're on a downward descent while some strange floating green worms shoot more projectiles at you. You really don't want to get hit here because you're so close to the boss, and doing the ice section can be so tedious. And unfortunately, the boss is super annoying too. It's like a big slug with open sores on its side or something, and you need to hit all 5 multiple times. The huge flaw with this fight is like the level before it. Your weapon matters way too much. It can be so hard if you don't have the torch. There are these little slugs that crawl up towards you along with these giant 2 flying parasites parasites, or whatever they're supposed to be. They're super hard to know where they will fly, and they're just relentless with their speed and how often they come in and out. You might be thinking, well, at least there's a checkpoint, and yes, that's true, but that also means you're stuck with whatever weapon you have when you got here. I've jumped everywhere on this guy's back, and I cannot find a single chest to grab a different weapon, and for a damn fight that requires you to throw downward, that is just terrible. I do like the concept of the fight though, and I think it's interesting how you're fighting on top of a parasitic host while these parasites come out to attack you. But overall, the two invincible flying things along with the slugs, the limitations of your weapons, plus having to wait for these swords to become hittable is just way too frustrating. I'm not a huge fan of this fight. Level 5, the final level of the game. So this is what true Ghosts N Goblins difficulty is all about. They throw everything at you this time. To start, there are these dragon snake skeleton things floating everywhere, and you need to act quickly to get out of that room in time. These basically spawn as fast as you could attack them, so it's all about timing to get out of this first room as quick as you can. Then we get to a marathon of red devils. You need to take down 4 in a row, and as always, the red devils are no joke. Their agility and evasive maneuvers are a huge pain, and you really need to learn their behavior well in order to take them out. They really don't telegraph their attacks either, so you've got to be super dialed in to react quickly enough. Sometimes they make little swoops before they fully commit to a bigger swoop, but overall they're really hard to avoid. To make matters even worse, I had the torch for this section and wasn't able to find a different weapon either. The most defeating part of this is that there are multiple difficult sections of this level, but you need to get pretty far for the checkpoint. You need to get out of this room, take on 2 devils, go up a floor, take on 2 more red devils. Then you need to move upward through multiple floors with these barfing, charging pig trolls that take a lot of hits, along with more floating skeletons and bugs. If you get hit just one time by any of the dragons or 4 devils, you need to be perfect through all of these floors of enemies, otherwise it just takes one more hit to send you all the way back to the beginning. It takes a while to get consistent results, and the enemies are just so fast and aggressive. I cannot underemphasize that again, you need to get through multiple floating skeletons, 4 red devils, and 5 ogres without getting hit more than just once to reach the checkpoint. The second half starts with a ladder climb that just takes a little patience to learn, and since it's right at the checkpoint, it avoids being super frustrating. You encounter what appears to be the devil from Ghosts N Goblins, giving you the illusion that it's the end of the level. The graphics get pretty glitchy as he shoots lines of fire at you, which is odd, but overall it's not too challenging of an enemy. The same can't be said though about these damn 2 heads that shoot fireballs out of their mouths from opposite sides of the room. The fireballs move fast, and your stiff jumping can make some moments feel impossible, especially when just using the torch. Fortunately, there are enough hidden chests in these rooms to get the gold suit, which allows for the special moves as we discussed earlier. If you time your special attack correctly, it can kill a head in just one use. The unfortunate part about this special move is that its invincibility doesn't last quite long enough, leaving you vulnerable for cheap hits. As if this all wasn't enough, you have another double boss fight between 2 devils at once. And the only way to make it through this is to take one out as fast as possible, otherwise both of them could shoot at the same time, giving you no safe space at all. A good weapon like the knife does wonders, or if you have the torch like I did, you need to not get hit on the 2 fights before this at all, because the special move is almost essential for getting through this fight. As if that wasn't enough, they put you up against not 1, not 2, but 3 of these eye clouds. These enemies were already difficult to avoid and predict against, but now there are 3 of them. It feels like there's definitely some RNG dealing with these clouds, and you need a bit of luck to go your way. All you can do is hop around and do your damnedest to hit them before they hit you. Fortunately, there is finally a chance to get your armor back, which at least shows that whoever created this hellhole wasn't totally insane. After the devil, the 2 heads, 2 devils, and 3 eye clouds, you still haven't reached the second checkpoint. You have another fire-breathing head with aerial enemies this time that like to swoop down and drop stuff. And this head shoots stuff extra fast, making the last reach for the checkpoint even more challenging. Once you finally get to the last checkpoint, you'll realize that the final boss is a giant fly, composed of many little flies. He's got some little projectiles that are shot out from his asshole, which is cool, I guess. But this fight is nothing compared to the 2 marathons before it. Now, once you've disposed of this fly, this is where you're met with the classic, "You aren't ready for the final boss yet, so you're going back to level 1 type of message that Ghosts N Goblins just loves. This message also has a typo, writing goddess instead of goddess, which makes sense because typos are basically a tradition of the series. So of course, you are sent back to level 1, and just as you'd expect, there's a bit of an increase in difficulty. It's not super noticeable, but you will feel a bit more enemies on the screen and maybe things move a bit faster, but it's nothing crazy. The weapon that you're sent back to grab in order to finish the game is the Goddess Bracelet, which is also featured in Super Ghouls N Ghosts, and it's unlocked by opening several chests in a row without getting hit. Overall, it's a pretty good weapon, and has some interesting properties. For example, the better your armor, the further your blast travels, and the closer you are to something, the more damage it does. Plus, it can also eat up projectiles. It's one of the best weapons in the game for sure, and has some serious power. Making your way through a second time is definitely a challenge, but something you must conquer if you'd like to see the true final boss and happy ending. The real final boss is literally Satan sitting in his throne. He's even named Lucifer, like from the Bible, but he was renamed Loki for the North American releases to avoid offending people, although I think we can all agree how unlikely it is for most people to ever see this boss to begin with. It's a pretty challenging last fight, but it's far from the hardest part in the game. You just need to get in between his feet and fire upward while trying to avoid his lasers, but they are fast, so it's easy to die quickly. Sections of the floor also disappear as the fight goes on, so it's really something you need to rush through and try to get a little lucky, since the fight is only about 15 seconds anyway. Overall, Ghouls N Ghosts is a pretty good sequel to Ghosts N Goblins. It's a serious challenge, but perhaps a bit easier than its predecessor, just due to its extra checkpoints, improved abilities, and powerful weapons. But make no mistake, it can be hard as hell, especially the last levels and multiple bosses. It is a cool game to have in your collection to pop in once in a while to see if you've gone soft, or you still got what it takes. Next time, we will be shifting our focus to the third entry in the classic G&G trilogy, Super Ghouls N Ghosts on Super Nintendo. As always, everybody, thank you for watching. I apologize for the length in between uploads. I really do still care and have a lot to talk about. It's just been tough at work and constantly working at least 55 hours a week. I do look forward to getting back to Super Ghouls N Ghosts as soon as I can, as well as many more reviews to come, plus more collection videos as well. Thank you again so much, and I hope you have an amazing day.